that which is on its way. And so Advent is a period of waiting. And what is awaited for by Christians during Advent is the birth of the Christ child, which is a symbolic story representing the inbreaking into the world of new hope and new possibility. And the message that the Christ child brings in the story is one of peace and human fellowship, which speaks to our deepest longings, that humanity could someday turn away from suspicion and hostility and selfishness and violence and truly know community and peace. So this is a time of waiting, hoping, and longing. December is also the time of the winter solstice, which is December 21st this year, the longest night of the year, prefiguring the season of darkness and cold that lies ahead. And in the northern pagan traditions, the winter season is one of waiting, but it is not a passive waiting. The soul goes underground to await the reviving energy of spring, but in the quiet darkness we are healing, we are storing up strength. In the pagan tradition, we are using the sacred season of winter, if we are wise, to sink deeper into our soul's longings, to know who we are and what we are about, and out of that wisdom, new plans and new purposes will be germinating. In the quiet darkness, we are dreaming dreams. And the paradox of the winter solstice is that even as it signals the arrival of winter, it also promises the return of spring. Because the solstice is the longest night, but it is also the tipping point. And after the solstice, the days are growing longer again. The light is returning. So the solstice celebrates both our embrace of the darkness and our expectation of the light. So it too is a time of waiting, hoping, and longing. This fall, some of you may know I began seminary at Christian Theological Seminary. And I have to say the process of becoming a UU minister is its own study in waiting, hoping, and longing, along with reading and more reading. But anyway, as a new seminary student, I took an intro to theology class that everyone has to take. And one of the things that we studied were theologies of hope. How did different religions understand hope? What is the importance of hope? What do they offer for hope? And I believe hope is central to Unitarian Universalism. We're going to talk about that in much more detail next Sunday. Reverend Galen Gengarich of All Souls, New York City, says that gratitude is fundamental to Unitarian Universalism. He thinks we should be known as the gratitude people because our religious tradition emphasizes the goodness of what is and the beauty of the earth and our lives on it, and the bounty of love and magic and mystery that has been poured, overflowing into our hands from the moment of our arrival, of the moment of our own advent, and poured, spilling out onto the good earth around us. And indeed, we have so much to be grateful for. And yet, amidst the beauty and the bounty and all of those things for which we are grateful, we know and experience pain and loss. Some of this is unavoidably part of the human condition, or seems so: death, aging, illness, accidents. These things are no less painful for being unavoidable, right? It's just part of life. And what we seek from our religious tradition is not to escape these things, but to understand them, to accept them, to find strength and wisdom to continue building meaningful lives in their midst, and then to support and comfort one another in our community. But there are other evils which seem to us neither inevitable nor unavoidable, although they have always been with us. And we're talking about things like hatred and mistrust and greed and bigotry and all of their evil fruit of war and poverty and isolation and violence. These things we do not accept as just the way the world has to be, and we are hopeful that a better world is possible. We believe in the power of reason and education to open minds and the power of love to open hearts. We have staked our entire religious tradition on that belief. We believe that human institutions can be better shaped to serve human needs. We believe that all of us working together, scientists and artists and educators and community leaders and engineers and yes, even politicians, and then all of us as just plain people in our ordinary everyday lives can find a way to live in harmony with one another. We believe peace is possible. And we believe that it is up to all of us to make it happen. That is our hope, and that is our longing. But does the world look like that? Is that the world that you woke up in today? Is that the world that you will wake up in tomorrow? How very far we are from that vision. When I was young, I thought with the arrogance of youth that progress was inevitable. That just as scientific knowledge accumulates through the collective effort of so many people patiently laboring in the vineyards of discovery, so freedom and opportunity and understanding must slowly accumulate, carrying humanity, however imperfectly, however slowly, still steadily forward. And in reality, of course, progress is never inevitable. It's never guaranteed. And today I look around me and it feels like, if anything, we may be regressing. So building the world we dream of requires patience and fortitude. It requires planting seeds that may be harvested many lifetimes from now. And in the meantime, there is waiting and hoping and longing, and waiting and waiting. Because while our tradition holds out the hope for the possibility of transformation, it is not necessarily sudden transformation. Our religious tradition is not that of apocalypse, where the old order just disappears and is replaced with a new order immediately. It is not a tradition of sudden deliverance. It is a tradition of evolution and growth. And those things require time and forbearance. So what Unitarian Universalism asks us to commit to, all of us, is a lifetime of waiting and hoping and longing. And the question that was on my heart as I was preparing for the service and thinking about the season of solstice and the season of Advent that we are entering was about how are we to live while we are waiting. And so that's why I chose the text for the service today, the poem A Gate A4 by the Palestinian immigrant Naomi Shihab Nye, daughter of a Palestinian immigrant and a Christian American. And in Gate A4, the poet finds herself in an unexpected state of waiting. Right? She's stuck in an airport. Her flight is delayed. She is no doubt surrounded by other people that are in the exact same predicament. They're all waiting. And we can imagine her frustration, right? Is there a worse feeling than realizing that you are going to be stuck in an airport for hours? And the answer is yes, of course there is. There are lots of worse feelings than that. But still, it's a bad feeling, that realization that you're stuck in an airport for hours. And who knows what kind of fears and practical calculations are going through her head. Maybe she's got a connecting flight. Maybe this is going to mess up a speaking engagement. She's an author after all. Maybe she's just going to miss brunch and she's worried about that. But she describes herself as wandering. She is temporarily exiled from progress towards her own plans and her final destination. She's just stuck waiting, preoccupied with her own concerns, as are all of the people around her. And then the loudspeaker breaks through with the request for assistance for anyone who knows Arabic to come to the gate, which happens to be her gate. And the speaker in the poem presumably is the real-life poet Naomi Shihab Nye, who is the daughter of a Palestinian immigrant. So she does know some Arabic, and she can help with this request, whatever it is. Still, she says, she pauses. One pauses these days, she says. And indeed, one does. How often do we get to do that quick mental calculation? Do I want to get involved? Do I have time to get involved? Am I the right person to get involved? She knows some Arabic, maybe. And what will happen to me if I get involved? In her context, an airport might feel like an uncongenial place for a person of Palestinian descent. I can imagine many Arab Americans have received not so stellar treatment in airports, from the sort of side eye of other passengers to additional harassment with the authorities. She may not want extra contact with the officials of the airport. But anyway, she doesn't say why she pauses. She just says that she pauses, which is the human thing to do when we all have our own reasons for why we pause, for why we may not be the best person for this situation, why we may not have the time. And then she goes to the gate to render what assistance she can anyway. And there she encounters an older woman in a state of deep distress. And what that woman needs is just for someone to clarify that her flight status, which Naomi Shihab Nye does. And at that point, she's done. She's done her good deed. It took her like 5 minutes probably. She solved the problem. The woman is comforted. And she could go. She could return to her solitary waiting and wandering. But instead, she takes a step further and she brings the woman into the circle of her care. And she connects her to her family. She gets her on the phone with her brother and her other brothers, her son and her other sons, and she reassures them that she's going to take care of their mother. She's going to sit with her on the plane and make sure she gets to her destination. And then she takes a step further and she brings the woman into the circle of her own life. She says, let's get my father on the phone. And they talk to her dad, who is a Palestinian, and it turns out they know a whole bunch of different people. And then she says, just for fun, let's talk to all of my poet friends. So they just start calling all of her Palestinian poet friends. She says they spent 2 hours together this way. In an interview, I think with Krista Tippett, Naomi Shihab Nye talks about learning from one of her young Japanese poetry students a concept called yutori, which I apologize if I am mispronouncing that. And yutori means spaciousness. The student was explaining that yutori is a kind of living with spaciousness. For example, it's leaving early enough to get somewhere so that you know you're going to arrive early, so when you do get there, you have time to look around. Now, I admit, I'd never heard of yutori before, but I love this idea of living with spaciousness. As a person who is chronically late, who is hyper-scheduled, and who is no stranger to the rushing lifestyle, my mind is kind of boggled at the idea of planning to get someplace early so you can just kind of stop and check it out and look around and maybe do some wandering and exploring and talk to random people, and that kind of blows my mind. But it's a beautiful concept. And I think that the situation in the poem must also be an example of yutori, of living with spaciousness, because she allows that momentary encounter with a stranger, just a couple of minutes, to expand into hours of conversation. And she allows that brief moment of connection to expand into a presence in her life. She says, this is my new best friend. Right? It's a lasting connection that she will have. And she does it with a sense of adventure. She says, we did this just for fun. So as we enter the frenetic holiday season, I invite you to reflect on, where is yutori, where is spaciousness in your life or your family's life? And by the poem's end, this sense of connection that she's created with this woman has spread all around them as if by magic. The older woman digs out these sort of old cookies and she's handing them out to everyone at the gates. And to my amazement, writes the poet, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo. We were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. And I looked around the gate, she says, that gate of late and weary ones, and I thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world. Not a single person in that gate, she says, once the crying and confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. And she concludes, this can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. But while we are waiting for the world that we dream of, while we are waiting for the seeds of peace that we are planting to come to fruition, we can invite people around us into what Naomi Shihab Nye calls the shared world, which is a world of trust and connection, a world where everyone is presumed welcome. It's a world of generosity and kindness. And out of that, we can create moments of actuality, where the world is as we want it to be, where the world is as we dream it to be, even if just for a moment. And this requires a little bit of courage. It requires us to move past that moment of pause, that very human one pauses these days. It requires us to move past that. And it requires a little faith in ourselves, the belief that we could be the right person for this moment, even if we don't exactly feel like the right person. That we trust ourselves to step into that moment, that we are enough. And it requires eutory, spaciousness. We must make room in our hearts and in our lives for the unplanned moment, the unexpected conversation, and the unforeseen connection, knowing that that moment may expand into hours, that that connection may expand into friendship and lifelong entanglement. And it requires trust, that we see past the unfamiliarity of the other, that we take the proffered food, the proffered cookie, that we risk on our common humanity. This can still happen anywhere. While we are waiting for that world we dream of, may we be open to those moments when we see one another with the transparent clarity of love, when the walls that separate us and divide us are laid low, and in our shared world, for that moment when our hope and our gratitude are one and the same. Blessed be and amen.